Hello, Ricky here from Design Plus Code, and today I'll be talking about designing for iPhone X. iOS 11 marks the introduction of the iPhone X, a much taller iPhone that has virtually no bezel. The 5.8-inch OLED screen is larger than the iPhone 8 Plus's 5.5-inch, yet the body size is about the same as the iPhone 8. For designers, this means more freedom in our canvas. Let's compare the iPhone 8 with the iPhone X. The extra 145 points can mean an additional row of content or the addition of a menu that we once thought was too cramped. That extra space applies to both the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus since they share the exact same ratio despite having different resolutions. When you put the iPhone X side by side with the original iPhone, you can notice that the space for content has almost doubled in height. In general, this means that modern apps will need to always include all of the bars: status, navigation, tab, and home indicator. Omitting these bars can not only mean a worse user experience, but it will also make your app inconsistent with Apple's own apps. If compared to the original iPhone, we get a whopping 332 points increase in height, which can afford us the equivalent of 7 navigation bars. The future is looking fantastic for content and bleak for the Hamburger menus. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the new design is in the top 10%. The sensor housing, also known as the notch, is an element that distracts and keeps the iPhone X's screen from truly being edge-to-edge. Technology-wise, it's currently impossible to do without, as it houses Face ID, the camera, and the speaker. Design-wise, it's one of the biggest compromises that Apple has made in recent years. But after looking at how other phone makers are solving the problem with either a large forehead, chin, or both, I can't say they're without compromises. Apple advises against hiding the notch with black bars. Their reasoning is that, as bothersome as it is, the notch still provides valuable space for the status bar and extra content. It provides context of the content underneath and gives a feeling that the screen is larger. Background elements such as wallpapers, maps, and colors don't suffer when being slightly clipped by the rounded corners and the notch. By hiding that space, your app will feel smaller and inconsistent with other apps, as explained in the video we have provided below. In iOS 11, screen titles are generally sized at 34 points. They're set at semi-bold in black. What's interesting is that when you scroll, the title transitions to the navigation bar, giving us back that value space. In landscape, it just remains small in the bar. This sends a clear message to designers that first, you should use that extra space wisely, and second, you need to make your design adaptive because that extra space may exist in portrait mode, but not in landscape mode. The status bar has more than doubled in height, increasing from 20 points to 44 points. The notifications can now be dragged from the top left. The control center can be swiped from the top right. Swiping from the bottom gives way to the home screen if done quickly. Or to reach the screen's navigator, you must interrupt that home swipe. When designing for the iPhone X, the rounded corners and the notch can clip the content. That should be avoided at all times. Using the Safe Area Layout Guide, you can push the content where the notch wouldn't be. Thus ensuring that no clipping will occur. In general, backgrounds should not follow the Safe Area Guide, while content such as text, images, and buttons should follow these guides. While most users won't switch to landscape mode on the iPhone X, there are still important scenarios for this usage. For example, for viewing a landscape photo, a full-screen video, or for reading an article with larger text. After they're finished, it's counterintuitive to have to switch back to portrait, especially if the device is docked or held comfortably in a landscape position. In landscape, the status bar is hidden to maximize content space. The navigation bar is reduced to 32 points, the tab bar to 30 points, and the home indicator to 23 points. If your app is already adapted for iPads, why not support iPhone's landscape as well? A large gain with minimal effort, as most modern apps are designed with adaptive layouts in mind. If you're a product designer, chances are that you have worked on a website. On the iPhone X in landscape, your site will have a large empty space on the left and right sides. That's because the safe area kicks in automatically to avoid clipping, which is an even worse result. To avoid this, Apple has created a guide for adapting your site for iPhone X in landscape. Basically, you can extend your backgrounds to fill the entire screen while keeping the content inset based on the safe area. Content clipping can also occur in the corners of the iPhone X. Unless you hide the status bar or home indicator, you shouldn't face this issue, since they cover the corner areas. However, for apps that are used mostly in full screen, like camera, it will be important to ensure that there is enough margin in the corners. To perfectly follow the rounded corners, a radius of around 16 points is recommended for your buttons. The iPhone X device is still inaccessible to many of us. Without the device on hand, the only way to experience it is via the iOS simulator. You can preview your app and your website by installing Xcode. For a decade, designers were scrambling to fit their content in the tiny screen of the original iPhone. A lot of designers decided to omit the tab bar entirely because it took too much vertical space. Some got creative and decided to put a button that would slide from the left. That was the birth of the famous Hamburger menu. While it was fun and fresh at first, it was a usable nightmare. More taps were needed to reach extra screens. As a result, this meant less usage of secondary tabs. Often, people would forget that there was more content. With bigger screens, one-handed usage began to suffer. Apple even made it possible to double-tap the home button to slide down the whole user interface in order to make the navigation bar reachable with the thumb. That translated into an extra double tap to reach the menu. The Hamburger menu was typically placed on the top left of the screen, so trying to reach that menu was even more frustrating. With a much taller screen, there was no longer a fight to find space for content. The tab bar is now the obvious choice to replace the Hamburger menu, since we can afford the space. The iPhone X cements that direction. If you have more than a couple of sections in your app, there is virtually no reason not to use the tab bar. In landscape, the tab bar takes even less space in iOS 11. The hamburger menu is pervasive on the web, and arguably one of the reasons why the mobile web experience has not caught up to the native experience. Even React Native uses native controls, which is a fantastic direction for web technologies. However, in iOS and especially for the iPhone X, you should use the tab bar instead. With the increasing number of device resolutions to deal with, it is crucial to make your layout adaptive. Using tools like Sketch's constraints and Xcode's auto layout, you have to design in a way that the screen size is flexible and can show extra menus if needed. In Xcode, you'll also find Stack Views, a fantastic tool for making your layouts more reactive to changes. Some elements and groups can stack together dynamically, and all you need to edit is the spacings as well as how the content will fill the box. Then, you can complete the work with auto layout. Apple recommends to use stack views first, then auto layout second. Developers work with point values, so it is important to understand the difference with pixels. When the iPhone was first introduced, the two units were the same. 1 point equals 1 pixel. Then, when Retina screens came along, 1 point became 2 pixels. So think of points as the values in the original iPhone, and pixels as the real values depending on the pixel density. For example, from the iPhone 4 all the way up to the iPhone 8 would equal to add 2x. iPhone 8 Plus and iPhone 10 equals to add 3x. To better understand the difference between points and pixels, I highly recommend watching the video in the link we have provided below. The iPhone has 5 main resolutions. 320 by 480 points is the iPhone 4S. The iPhone SE at 320 by 568 points. The iPhone 8, 375 by 667 points. The iPhone 8 Plus, 414 by 736 points, and iPhone 10, 375 by 812 points. The layout doesn't scale, but expands based on the resolution. For example, the navigation bar only adjusts the width but keeps the same height. Elements inside it remain intact. Let's check the different iPhones in landscape mode. The iPhone 8 Plus is the only iPhone that acts more like an iPad in landscape mode. In other words, a left navigator may appear, replacing the need for a tab bar. Size classes allow you to categorize screen widths and heights, and set conditions based on those combinations. For example, you can decide that an avatar is 30 by 30 points on a screen with compact width, but 50 by 50 points on a screen with regular width, just because there is so much more empty space on the larger screen. Since the layout can be pretty different between portrait and landscape or between iPhone and iPad, size classes are essential for customizing your layout beyond the normal auto layout constraints. There are 3 types of size classes for both width and height: compact, regular, and any. By combining these, you will affect several devices at once. For example, compact width by regular height will target all iPhones in portrait, but won't affect landscape or iPad. What's interesting is that compact by compact will affect iPhone in landscape, except iPhone 6 Plus, 7 Plus, and 8 Plus. even though the screen has a rather large width. As a result, it's important to get familiar with the different combinations. The app icon is used for the branding of your app. It's the first thing that users see when they experience it. It appears prominently on the home screen, the App Store, in Spotlight, and in Settings. At1x assets are no longer supported for the iPhone, so you don't need to generate them. App icons have two resolutions now, At2x and At3x. There are three types: App Icon, Spotlight, and Settings. For the iPad, At1x and At2x are used. Since iOS 7, the rounded corners have shifted from plain rounded corners to a super ellipsed shape. It is important to keep note that you shouldn't export the icons with a mask, or you'll potentially find black artifacts. Instead, just export square assets to the App Store. Icon Grid. Apple applied a golden ratio on some of their icons. This ensures that the icons are the heroes while keeping good proportions. While this is a good rule to follow, it's not a strict rule. Even Apple admitted it on many of their icons. iOS uses vibrant colors to bring out the buttons. These colors tend to work well against a white background as much as a black background. Keep in mind that colors should be used sparsely, for call to actions and minimal branding areas like the navigation bar. Roughly, only 10 to 20% of your design should have colors, or they will compete too much against the content. iOS often uses neutral colors to serve as the background and menu areas. A well-contrasted black text against a white background is used to make the text comfortable to read. Finally, the pastel blue is applied for making the buttons stand out. The system font is now called San Francisco Pro Text for text smaller than 20 points, and the San Francisco Pro Display for text at 20 points or larger. It is important to note that when using the system font, you now have access to dynamic type, which lets the font adjust based on the user's preference. The general rule is 44 points for buttons and 12 points for small text, 17 points for body and text, and 20 points plus for titles. A general rule is to have a minimum padding or margin of 8 points. This creates enough breathing room, which makes the layout easier to scan and the text more readable. Also, UI elements should be aligned and texts should have the same baseline position. It is recommended to include the status bar in as many places as you can. Users rely on it for important information such as signal, time, and battery. The text and icons can be white or black, but the background can be customized into any color and merge with the navigation bar. The navigation bar is used for quick information about the screen. The left portion can be used for placing back, profile, menu buttons, whereas the right portion is generally used for action buttons like Add, Edit, and Done. Note that if you use any of these system icons, you don't need to create assets for them. Just like the status bar, the background can be customized to any color, and typically has a subtle blur to ensure that the text is always readable. When the status bar is present, both backgrounds are merged. When you have a lot of content, it is always wise to make it searchable. When you need more real estate to place your action buttons and screen status, you'll want to use the toolbar. The tab bar is the main navigation between multiple screens. Avoid the hamburger menu if you have few items. Menus that are always visible will increase usage since obvious always win. Additionally, it is encouraged to add text next to your icons as most people won't instantly recognize symbols, especially when they're not universally known. When they're not active, icons will be gray. Like this, they attract less attention. The table view is a very common user interface for listing content. Most apps use a form of table view. That's because it can be very basic or highly customizable, down to the smallest elements. At the basic level, you can use a number of preset styles and accessories. Cells can also be grouped with a title above and description underneath. When you have both rows and columns in a grid style, you'll need the collection view. Although a little more advanced, it can pretty much create any layout you can dream of. Collection view layouts may look like these, or a combination of them. The possibilities are endless. The alert dialog is used for conveying critical information and prompting quick actions. Alerts should be kept minimal and exiting must be obvious. The activity dialog allows you to share content, text, images, links to iOS features like AirDrop, favorites, bookmarks, and apps like Mail, Facebook, and Twitter. While the look can't be customized, the options are. When the information presented isn't short, you can design a modal that is full-sized, typically appearing from a slide, fade, flip, or page animation. Like other modals, it must be easy to cancel and keep as short as possible. The keyboard is used to input information in text fields such as search, chat, or login. It's highly customizable for URL, email, phone numbers, and even emoji. You can choose between the light and dark themes, as well as how the action button is named. Return being the default. When you have multiple options to choose from, you can use the picker control. It's particularly used for dates, which controls 3 fields in one action. While the tab bar navigates to the main sections, the segmented control is used for subsections. Sliders are interactive controls that are less precise, but extremely useful for quick settings like sound, brightness, and video progress. The progress bar is an indicator showing how far an activity has gone. For example, you can use this to show the loading progress of a web view. Note that the height can be customized. Use this to quickly toggle between on and off. Do not use this for anything else than on and off. Slower but more precise than the slider, the stepper allows the user to increase or decrease a value by an increment of 1. The border and background are customizable. There are the native icons that permeate iOS. Since they're commonly used, they're instantly recognized by users for their meaning. Using them for other purposes may confuse your users, so it's important to be aware of how they're used in iOS. When you design custom icons outside of these, it is important to use well-known symbols. Additionally, I strongly recommend to always accompany them with a small text of 10 points or more. These templates are not only useful for study, but also to reuse and customize, so you don't have to start from scratch, which opens the possibility for errors. As you get more comfortable with them, you'll be able to get more creative. If you're designing for iOS, you'll want to use pre-made elements such as the status, navigation, and tab bars. Get comfortable with all the colors, sizes, fonts, and components. Officially supported by Apple. iOS 11 GUI by Great Simple Studio is the most complete iOS GUI with a ton of elements to play with. My personal collection of over 260 mockups made entirely in vector. This is perfect for presenting your designs. The devices are used throughout this book. A treasure trove for iOS design resources, including SoundKit, diverse device hands, and useful GUIs. What Not to Do is an excellent article on designing for the iPhone X. It includes a few great examples on what not to do when designing for iPhone X. There are practices that you should avoid at all costs, especially if you're new to iOS. Follow these simple examples put together by Apple. Even a quick glance can go a long way. If you'd like to read more about iOS from a different perspective, check out this excellent and comprehensive guide by Ivo Mintinen.